In the dusty, unforgiving heat of Dust Creek, Arizona, a 35-year-old widow, struggling to survive in a dying mining town, discovered two starving orphans abandoned in the desert after a stagecoach massacre. Despite threats from her cruel employer, she risked everything to feed them in secret, night after night, asking for nothing in return. Years later, when that same woman faced losing everything she'd built to a vengeful scheme, those two orphans, now grown and successful, returned to the town that had forgotten them, bringing with them the power to save the woman who had once been their only light in the darkness. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The sun in Dust Creek didn't rise, it attacked. By noon, the heat shimmered off the cracked earth like ghosts dancing on graves, and by evening the wind carried nothing but dust and the bitter taste of broken dreams. It was a town that had once thrived on silver, back when the mines ran deep and men came from all corners with pickaxes and hope. Now the mines were empty, the hope was gone, and all that remained were the stubborn and the stranded. Martha Colby was both. At 35, she moved through the world like a woman who had learned to carry weight without complaint. Her hands were rough, calloused from years of washing dishes, scrubbing floors, and hauling water from the well behind the Broken Spur saloon. Her dark hair, streaked with early gray, was always tied back in a tight bun. Her dress, faded blue cotton, had been mended so many times the seams told their own story. She had been a school teacher once, back when Thomas was alive, back when they had a small house on the edge of town with a garden and a rocking chair on the porch. They were going to have children. They were going to grow old together. But the mine took Thomas 3 years ago, buried him under 1,000 tons of rock and shattered dreams. The company paid her $15 and called it an accident. She sold the house to pay for the funeral. The garden died. The rocking chair was taken by creditors. Now she worked at the Broken Spur, serving whiskey to men who didn't look her in the eye and cleaning up after cowboys who tracked mud and blood across the floor. The saloon was a sagging, sun-bleached building at the end of Main Street, its sign hanging crooked, its windows fogged with years of smoke and grime, and it was owned by Clayton Briggs. Clayton was a man whose bitterness had curdled into cruelty. He'd once owned a ranch, hundreds of acres stretching to the hills, but drought and debt had taken it all. Now he ran the saloon like a man exacting revenge on the world, nickel by nickel. He paid Martha barely enough to rent a room above the general store, a cramped space with a leaking roof and a single window that overlooked the alley. He watched her like a hawk, counting every glass, every plate, every scrap of food. "You eat on your own time, with your own money," he'd told her on her first day, his gray eyes cold as stone. "I see you pocketing anything, you're out." Understand? She understood, but understanding didn't make it easier. Some nights she went to bed with her stomach hollow, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and wondering how much longer she could hold on. She thought about Thomas often, about the way he used to hold her hand and tell her everything would be all right. But Thomas was gone. And out here in Dust Creek, hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, Martha didn't let the hardness settle into her bones the way it had with so many others. She still said good morning to the shopkeeper. She still smiled at the children who passed by on their way to the schoolhouse. She still believed, somewhere deep and quiet, that kindness mattered, even when the world gave her every reason not to. The day it all changed started like any other. She woke before dawn, dressed in the dim light, and walked the dusty road to the saloon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the kind of beauty that felt almost cruel in a place so harsh. She unlocked the back door, lit the lanterns, and began sweeping the floor. By the time the first customers arrived, she was already tired, but she smiled anyway, poured their drinks, and kept her head down. She didn't know that by nightfall, her life, and the lives of two children she had never met, would be changed forever. It happened just after sunset, when the desert sky burned red and the shadows grew long across the empty street. Martha was wiping down the bar, her arms aching from the day's work, when she heard the commotion outside. Voices, sharp and urgent, cut through the evening quiet. She paused, cloth in hand, and listened. "Stage got hit about 5 miles out," someone shouted. "Apache, maybe, or bandits, hard to tell." Her heart sank. Stagecoach attacks weren't uncommon, but they were always brutal. She crossed to the window and peered through the dusty glass. A small crowd had gathered near the sheriff's office. Men on horseback, covered in dust and sweat, were talking fast, gesturing toward the desert road. Sheriff Jack Thornton stood in the center, hat pulled low, arms crossed. He was a lean man with a weathered face and a reputation for fairness, though fairness didn't always mean justice in a town like Dust Creek. Martha stepped outside, drawn by a pull she couldn't name. The air was still hot, clinging to her skin like a damp cloth. She moved closer, staying at the edge of the crowd, listening. "Driver's dead," one of the riders said, his voice flat. "Shotgun guard, too. Passengers didn't make it either. Looked like they'd been dead a few hours by the time we found them." "Any survivors?" the sheriff asked. The rider hesitated. "2 kids. Found 'em hiding under some brush about a quarter mile from the wreck. Boy and a girl. Looked half dead from thirst." Martha's breath caught. "Where are they now?" Thornton asked. "Tied 'em to the horses. Brought 'em in. They're over by the church." Without thinking, Martha turned and walked toward the small chapel at the far end of town. Her boots kicked up dust with every step, her pulse quickening. She didn't know why she was going. She just knew she had to. The church was a humble structure, whitewashed wood, with a crooked cross nailed above the door. Father Miguel, a kind man with silver hair and gentle eyes, stood outside speaking quietly to someone. When he saw Martha approaching, he stepped aside. And there they were, 2 children, huddled together on the church steps like wounded animals. The boy, no older than 11, sat with his back straight, his jaw clenched, his arms wrapped protectively around the girl. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt and dried blood. His eyes were hard, guarded, the eyes of someone who had seen too much too soon. The girl, maybe 7, leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Her dress was little more than rags, her bare feet covered in cuts and blisters. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes half closed. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Martha's chest tightened. Father Miguel spoke softly. "Their parents were on the stage, both gone. No other family that we know of. I've sent word to the territorial office, but it could be weeks before anyone comes." "What will happen to them?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The priest shook his head. "Sheriff says they'll stay at the church for now. I'll do what I can, but—" He trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging heavy between them. The church had no resources. The town had no orphanage. And 2 more mouths to feed in a place where most folks were already starving was a burden no one wanted. Martha knelt slowly in front of them. The boy's eyes snapped to hers, sharp and suspicious. He pulled the girl closer. "I'm not going to hurt you," Martha said gently. "My name is Martha." The boy didn't respond. His grip on his sister tightened. Martha looked at the girl. Her lips were trembling. Her small hands clutched at her brother's shirt like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. "When's the last time you ate?" Martha asked. The boy's jaw worked. He looked away. "Don't remember." Martha stood, her decision already made. She turned to Father Miguel. "I'll bring them something." "Martha, I'll bring them something," she repeated, firmer this time. And before anyone could stop her, she was already walking back toward the saloon, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She didn't have much, but she had enough, and that would have to do, because no child, no person, should be left to starve while others looked away. Martha returned to the church that night with a cloth bundle tucked under her arm. Inside were 2 biscuits, a small portion of salted beef, and half a canteen of water. It wasn't much, but it was all she could spare without Clayton noticing. The children were still there, sitting in the same spot, though Father Miguel had given them a thin blanket to share. The boy looked up as she approached, his eyes wary but hungry. "I brought you something," Martha said quietly, kneeling before them again. She unwrapped the bundle and set it between them. The girl's eyes widened. The boy hesitated, as if waiting for the trick, the cost, the condition. When none came, he reached out slowly and took a biscuit. He broke it in half and handed the larger piece to his sister. Martha's throat tightened as she watched them eat. They didn't devour it. They were careful, deliberate, like they knew it might be the last meal they'd get for a while. "What are your names?" she asked softly. The boy chewed slowly, then swallowed. "Samuel. People call me Sam. This is Lucy." Lucy looked up at her with wide, gray eyes, crumbs clinging to her chin. "Thank you," she whispered. Martha smiled. "You're welcome, sweetheart." She stayed with them until they finished, then gathered the cloth and stood. "I'll come back tomorrow night. Same time." Sam frowned. "Why?" "Because you're hungry," Martha said simply. "And I can help. We got nothing to give you. I'm not asking for anything." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand what kind of person gave without taking. Finally he nodded. Martha kept her word. The next night she came again, and the night after that. Each time she brought whatever she could, a piece of bread, some beans, a strip of dried meat. She packed it carefully, hiding it in her apron, sneaking it out the back door of the saloon when Clayton wasn't looking. But Clayton noticed everything. On the 5th night, as Martha was wrapping up the last of the day's leftovers, his voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. "What do you think you're doing?" She froze. Slowly she turned. Clayton stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face dark with suspicion. "Just cleaning up," she said evenly. "That food goes in the slop bucket, not in your pocket. It's going to waste anyway." "It's my waste," he snapped, stepping closer, "and I decide what happens to it." "You think I don't see what you've been doing? Sneaking around, playing saint with the church strays?" Martha's jaw tightened. "They're children, Clayton. They're starving. Not my problem, and not yours either, unless you want to start paying for it. I work 12 hours a day for you. I think I've earned a few scraps." His eyes narrowed. "You've earned what I say you've earned, and right now you're one step away from losing even that." He leaned in close, his breath sour with whiskey. "You keep feeding those kids. You're done here. Understand?" She held his gaze, her heart pounding, her fists clenched at her sides. "I understand." "Good." He stepped back, satisfied. "Now get out, and leave that bundle where it is." Martha set the cloth down slowly, then walked past him without another word. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't let him see. That night, she didn't go to the church. She went to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the cracked wall. She thought about Thomas, about the promises they'd made, about the woman she used to be. And then she thought about Sam and Lucy, sitting in the cold, waiting for her. The next morning, she woke before dawn, bought 2 biscuits from the general store with her own money, and wrapped them in her handkerchief. That evening, when Clayton was distracted with a card game in the main room, she slipped out the back door and walked to the church. Sam was sitting on the steps, alone. When he saw her, his expression softened, just a little. "Thought you weren't coming back," he said. Martha sat down beside him. "I made a promise." "Your boss find out?" "He did. And—" She handed him the bundle. "And I'm still here." Sam took it, his throat working. For the first time, he looked at her not with suspicion, but with something else. Something fragile and cautiously hopeful. "Why?" he asked quietly. Martha smiled, tired but certain. "Because someone has to. For 3 more weeks, Martha continued her quiet rebellion. She came to the church every night, always careful, always watchful. Sometimes she brought food she'd bought herself. Other times, she risked taking leftovers when Clayton's attention was elsewhere. She never asked the children about their parents, and they never spoke of the attack. Some wounds were too fresh to touch, but slowly they began to trust her. Lucy started smiling when she saw Martha approach. Sam stopped sitting with his arms crossed, his guard lowered just enough to let her in. They told her small things, how Lucy liked to draw pictures in the dirt, how Sam used to help his father fix wagon wheels, how their mother used to sing to them at night. Martha listened to every word, holding their stories like precious things. And then one evening, everything changed. When Martha arrived at the church, Father Miguel was standing outside with a woman she'd never seen before. The stranger was tall and elegant, dressed in a traveling coat with polished buttons, her dark hair pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She looked out of place in Dust Creek, like a rose blooming in a desert. "Martha," Father Miguel said warmly, "this is Caroline Hayes. She's come all the way from San Francisco." The woman extended her hand. "You must be the one who's been caring for my niece and nephew." Martha's heart skipped. "Your niece and nephew?" Caroline nodded, her eyes softening. "Samuel and Lucy. Their mother was my younger sister. I only just heard about the attack. Word travels slowly out here. I've been searching for them for weeks." Martha looked past her toward the church door. "They're inside?" "Yes. I've already spoken with them. They told me about you, about what you've done." Martha shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. You kept them alive," Caroline interrupted gently. "In a town that would have let them starve. That's more than special, Mrs. Colby. That's a miracle." Before Martha could respond, the church door opened. Sam and Lucy stepped out into the fading light. Lucy was holding a small cloth doll Caroline must have brought her. Sam stood beside his sister, his expression unreadable. "We're leaving," he said quietly, looking at Martha. "Aunt Caroline says we can live with her, in the city." Martha's throat tightened. "That's wonderful." Lucy stepped forward, clutching the doll. "Will you come with us?" "Oh, sweetheart." Martha knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from Lucy's face. "I can't. This is my home." "But you're alone here," Lucy said, her voice trembling. "Just like we were." Martha pulled her into a hug, blinking back tears. "I'll be all right, I promise." Sam approached slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in a piece of torn fabric. He held it out to her. "What's this?" Martha asked. "My pa's compass," he said. "It's all I got left of him. I want you to have it." Martha shook her head. "Sam, I can't." "You gave us everything," he said, his voice thick. "Let us give you something back." She took it carefully, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a tarnished brass compass. The glass cracked but still intact. The needle trembled, then settled, pointing north. "So you always know which way to go," Sam said. Martha closed her fingers around it, her vision blurring. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, the 4 of them, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and violet. Then Caroline placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "We should go. The stage leaves at dawn." Lucy hugged Martha one more time, fierce and tight. Sam nodded once, solemn, his eyes saying what his voice couldn't. And then they were gone, walking down the dusty street toward the boarding house where Caroline had rented rooms for the night. Martha stood outside the church long after they disappeared, the compass warm in her palm. Father Miguel came to stand beside her. "You did a good thing," he said softly. Martha wiped her eyes. "I just hope they'll be happy." "They will be," he assured her. "Because of you." She nodded, though her heart felt hollow. She tucked the compass into her pocket and began the walk back to her room, alone once more. But this time, the loneliness felt different, because somewhere out there, 2 children were safe. and she had been the one to keep them that way. 15 years passed like wind across the desert. Slow at first, then all at once. Dust Creek didn't change much. The mine stayed closed. The Broken Spur Saloon eventually shuttered its doors when Clayton Briggs drank himself to death one winter, alone and unmourned. The town shrank, buildings abandoned, families moving on to places with more promise and less dust. But Martha stayed. She was 50 now, her hair more silver than brown, lines etched around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But her hands were still strong, her back still straight, and her heart, though quieter, still beat with the same stubborn kindness that had defined her younger years. After Clayton died, Martha used the small savings she'd scraped together over the years and bought the old boarding house on the edge of town. It was a tired 2-story building with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but it had good bones. She spent months fixing it up, patching the roof, replacing broken windows, scrubbing floors until they gleamed. She called it Colby's Rest. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She rented rooms to travelers passing through, to miners looking for work, to families down on their luck who needed a place to stay for a week or a month. She charged fair prices, cooked hot meals, and never turned anyone away who couldn't pay. Some folks said she was too soft, that she'd never make a profit that way. But Martha didn't measure success in dollars. The boarding house became a quiet refuge in a hard town. People came and went, and Martha greeted each one the same way, with a warm smile and a cup of coffee. She kept the place tidy, the beds made, the lamps lit. In the evenings, she'd sit on the porch in Thomas's old rocking chair, the one she'd managed to buy back years ago, and watch the sun set over the distant hills. On her dresser, beside a small photograph of Thomas, sat the brass compass Sam had given her all those years ago. She wound it every morning, even though the needle no longer moved smoothly. It was tarnished now, the glass more cracked than before, but she kept it polished, kept it close. She thought about Sam and Lucy often, wondered what they looked like now, whether they were happy, whether they remembered her. Caroline had written once, a year after they'd left, to say the children were adjusting well to life in San Francisco. But after that, the letters stopped. Life moved on. People forgot. Martha didn't hold it against them. She hoped they'd built good lives, far away from the dust and the ghosts of Dust Creek. The boarding house kept her busy, kept her hands occupied and her mind from wandering too far into the past. She had regulars now, old Mr. Garrett, who rented a room by the month and played harmonica on the porch. The Calloway family, who stayed every time they passed through on their way to visit relatives in Tucson. Father Miguel, who still came by for Sunday supper and made her laugh with stories from the church. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't famous, but she was content. One evening in late autumn, as the air turned cool and the cottonwoods along the creek began shedding their leaves, Martha sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the compass resting in her lap. The sky was painted orange and pink, the kind of sunset that made you believe, just for a moment, that the world was gentler than it seemed. She ran her thumb over the compass's worn surface, tracing the engraved initials on the back. J. H. Sam's father, a man she'd never met, but whose children she'd helped save. "I hope they're all right," she whispered to the wind, "wherever they are." The breeze carried her words away, across the empty street, over the rooftops, into the vast and endless desert beyond. She didn't know that at that very moment, 2 figures were boarding a train headed south. Didn't know that after 15 years of silence, someone had finally remembered, and that soon, very soon, her quiet life was about to be shaken, not by tragedy this time, but by grace. It started with whispers, the way most trouble did in small towns. Martha first heard it at the general store, where she'd gone to buy flour and coffee. The shopkeeper, a wiry man named Dutch, gave her an odd look as he rang up her items. "Heard some folks got sick after staying at your place," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Martha frowned. "Sick? Who?" The Hendersons, and that mining crew that came through last week. Word is they all came down with fever and stomach trouble right after eating your cooking." Her heart sank. "That's not possible." "Everyone who stayed with me has been fine." Dutch shrugged, uncomfortable. "Just telling you what I heard." But the whispers didn't stop there. By the next day, they'd grown louder, sharper. Martha noticed people crossing the street when they saw her coming. Mrs. Pemberton, who usually waved from her garden, turned away. Even Father Miguel looked troubled when she arrived at church that Sunday. "Martha," he said quietly, pulling her aside after service, "there are rumors going around, serious ones." "About the boarding house?" He nodded. "People are saying you're serving spoiled food, that you're cutting corners to save money. There's talk of shutting you down." "That's absurd," Martha said, her voice rising. "I've never served anything that wasn't fresh and proper. You know me, Father. You know I wouldn't." "I know," he said gently, "but others don't. And fear spreads faster than truth." By midweek, the rumors had reached Sheriff Thornton. He came to the boarding house one afternoon, hat in hand, looking apologetic but official. "Martha, I need to ask you some questions." She led him to the parlor, her hands trembling slightly as she poured him coffee. "What's this about, Jack?" "There have been complaints. Multiple people claiming they got sick after staying here. I've got to investigate." "Who's making these complaints?" He hesitated. "Can't say just yet. But it's serious enough that the territorial health inspector is coming down from Prescott. He'll be here in 2 days. Martha's world tilted. "Jack, I run a clean establishment. You've eaten here yourself. Have I ever served you anything questionable?" "No," he admitted, "but I've got to follow procedure. If the inspector finds violations, he can shut you down permanently." After he left, Martha walked through every room, checking every corner, every cupboard, every dish. Everything was spotless. Her food stores were fresh. Her water was clean. There was nothing that could explain the accusations. But the damage was already done. Her last 3 guests checked out early. No new travelers came. The boarding house, once warm with voices and life, became silent and empty. Then, 3 days later, the real blow came. Martha was sitting on the porch when a wagon pulled up. 2 men stepped down, one wearing a badge, the other carrying a leather satchel. Behind them came a face she hadn't seen in 15 years, though it had aged badly, hardened by bitterness and whiskey. Clayton Briggs, Jr. He was the spitting image of his father. Same cruel eyes, same sneering mouth. He'd left town years ago after his father died, and no one had missed him. "Mrs. Colby," the inspector said formally, "I'm here to conduct a health inspection of your establishment." Martha stood, her spine straight. "Of course. Everything is in order." But Clayton stepped forward, his smile cold and satisfied. "We'll see about that. I've got witness statements, people who got sick, evidence of negligence. You," Martha breathed, understanding flooding through her, "you're behind this." "My father told me about you," Clayton said softly, venomously. "How you defied him. Thought you were better than him. Well, you're not, and now everyone's going to see it." The inspector moved past her into the boarding house. Martha followed, her heart pounding. She watched as he examined her kitchen, her pantry, her stores. And then he stopped, frowned, reached behind a shelf and pulled out a cloth sack. Inside were chunks of rotting meat, crawling with maggots. "Mrs. Colby," the inspector said gravely, "this is a serious violation." "That's not mine," Martha said, her voice shaking. "Someone put that there. I would never—" "Save it for the hearing," Clayton said, his smile widening. "You're done." The hearing was set for the following afternoon at the town hall, a weathered building that doubled as a courtroom when needed. By noon, it seemed half of Dust Creek had gathered inside, drawn by scandal and the promise of drama. Martha sat alone at the front table, her hands folded in her lap, the compass tucked in her dress pocket like a talisman. She'd barely slept. Her mind kept circling back to the rotting meat, to Clayton's triumphant sneer, to the way Sheriff Thornton had looked at her with something close to pity. The inspector sat at the front with a stack of papers. Clayton Briggs, Jr. lounged in the back row, arms crossed, looking like a man who'd already won. "We'll begin," the inspector said, adjusting his spectacles. "Mrs. Colby, you stand accused of operating an unsanitary establishment and serving contaminated food to paying guests. How do you answer?" Martha stood, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Not guilty. I've run that boarding house with care and honesty for over a decade. Whatever was found in my kitchen was planted there." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "That's a serious accusation," the inspector said. "So is the one being made against me." Clayton stood, his voice loud and mocking. "You calling me a liar, Martha? You calling all those sick folks liars too? I'm saying someone wanted to destroy me, and I think we both know who." Before Clayton could respond, the door at the back of the hall swung open. The room fell silent. Two figures stepped inside, and for a moment, Martha couldn't breathe. The first was a man, tall and composed, dressed in a fine gray suit with a black vest and polished boots. His face was clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly combed, but his eyes, those eyes, were the same ones that had looked at her with fear and suspicion 15 years ago on the church steps. Sam. Beside him stood a woman in a modest traveling dress of deep blue, her hair pinned elegantly, her posture confident but warm. She carried a leather satchel and moved with the grace of someone educated, someone who had risen far beyond the dusty streets of this dying town. "Lucy." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Sam's gaze swept the room, then locked onto hers. His expression softened, just for a moment, before hardening again as he turned toward the inspector. "Excuse the interruption," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "My name is Dr. Samuel Hayes. This is my sister, Miss Lucy Hayes. We've traveled from San Francisco because we heard that Mrs. Martha Colby was being falsely accused." The inspector blinked. "And what business is this of yours, sir?" "Mrs. Colby saved our lives 15 years ago," Lucy said, stepping forward, "when we were children. Orphaned and starving, she risked everything to feed us, to care for us, when no one else would." A murmur spread through the crowd. Martha felt tears sting her eyes. "That's very touching," Clayton said from the back, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "but it doesn't change the facts. She was running a filthy kitchen. Was she?" Sam reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He handed it to the inspector. "That's a signed affidavit from 3 of the so-called sick guests. They admitted they were paid to lie, $50 each, by a man named Clayton Briggs, Jr. The room erupted. Clayton shot to his feet. "That's a damn lie." "Is it?" Lucy opened her satchel and pulled out a small glass vial. "This is a sample taken from the meat found in Mrs. Colby's kitchen. I had it analyzed by a chemist in Prescott. The decay pattern is consistent with meat that was stored outside for at least 5 days before being placed indoors. Mrs. Colby's pantry records show she received fresh deliveries only 2 days prior. The timeline doesn't match." The inspector took the vial, studied it, then looked up sharply at Clayton. "Furthermore," Sam continued, "I spoke with the freight manager. He confirmed that Mr. Briggs purchased a large quantity of spoiled beef from the slaughterhouse last week. He claimed it was for animal feed." Sheriff Thornton stood slowly, his hand moving to his belt. "Clayton?" Clayton's face went red, then pale. "This is a setup. They're lying to protect her." "No," Sam said quietly, stepping closer. "We're telling the truth. Something you wouldn't know if it hit you in the face." The inspector set down his papers. "Mr. Briggs, based on this evidence, I'm recommending charges be brought against you for fraud, defamation, and tampering with a business establishment." Clayton lunged toward the door, but Sheriff Thornton was faster. He caught him by the arm, spun him around, and cuffed him in one smooth motion. "You're under arrest." As Clayton was dragged from the hall, shouting and cursing, Martha stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Sam and Lucy turned toward her, and for the first time in 15 years, she saw them truly, not as frightened children, but as the people they'd become, strong, brave, whole, because she had refused to let them be forgotten. But Martha barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on Sam and Lucy, who stood waiting near the front of the room. When the last person had filed out, she finally moved. Her legs felt unsteady, her heart too large for her chest. She stopped a few feet away from them, suddenly uncertain. "Is it really you?" she whispered. Lucy smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's really us." Martha's composure shattered. She opened her arms, and they came to her, not as children this time, but as grown souls who remembered what it meant to be saved. They held each other tightly, and for a long moment, no one spoke. There were no words big enough. Finally, Sam pulled back, his jaw tight with emotion. "We never forgot you, Mrs. Colby. Not for one day. I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Martha said, her voice breaking. "I thought you'd moved on, built new lives." "We did," Lucy said softly. "But you were always part of those lives. You're the reason we had lives to build at all." They sat together on the old wooden benches, and the years between them began to collapse. Sam told her how Aunt Caroline had sent him to school, how he'd worked his way through medical college, how he now ran a clinic in San Francisco that treated people regardless of their ability to pay. Lucy spoke of becoming a teacher, of opening a school for children from poor families, of fighting to give others the chances she'd been given. "We tried to find you years ago," Sam said, "but we didn't know where to start. Then a few weeks ago, I met a traveling merchant who mentioned Dust Creek. Said there was a widow here who ran a boarding house and never turned anyone away. I knew it had to be you. And when we heard about the accusations," Lucy added, "we dropped everything and came." Martha shook her head in wonder. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, we did," Sam said firmly. "You taught us something that no school ever could, that one person's kindness can change everything." Lucy reached into her satchel and pulled out a wrapped package. "We brought you something." Martha carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a wooden plaque, beautifully carved and polished to a shine. Engraved in elegant script were the words, "Kindness is a flame that never dies. It passes from heart to heart, lighting the way for those who have lost their path, in gratitude to Martha Colby, who lit our way when the world was dark." Below the inscription were two names, Samuel and Lucy Hayes. Martha traced the letters with trembling fingers, unable to speak. "We want you to hang it in the boarding house," Lucy said, "so everyone who stays there knows what kind of woman runs it. And there's something else," Sam added. He pulled an envelope from his coat. "We've arranged for a fund to be set up in your name, enough to keep the boarding house running, to make repairs, to ensure you never have to worry again." "No," Martha said quickly, "I can't accept that." "You can and you will," Sam said, his tone gentle but unyielding. "You gave when you had nothing. Let us give now that we have something." Martha looked at them both, these two souls she'd sheltered in the coldest part of their lives, and felt a peace settle over her that she hadn't known in years. "All right," she whispered. That evening, they walked together back to Colby's Rest. Sam helped her hang the plaque above the front door, right where the lamplight would catch it each night. Lucy made tea in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Martha had once packed secret bundles of food. They sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose. Martha held the brass compass in one hand and Lucy's hand in the other. Sam sat beside her, his presence steady and sure. "You know," Martha said softly, "I used to think I gave you something that night, but now I see, you gave me something too." "What's that?" Lucy asked. Martha smiled, her eyes on the horizon. "A reason to believe the world isn't as hard as it pretends to be." The three of them sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, like small flames in the vast and endless sky. And in that moment, Martha understood something she'd always suspected, but never fully believed. That kindness, once given, never truly disappears. It lives on, in the hearts it touches, in the lives it changes, in the quiet moments when strangers become family. She had lit a flame 15 years ago in the cold and the dark, and now that flame had come home.